Hello, everyone, and welcome to another season three episode of the Top Cyber Pro podcast. I'm founder and CEO of Top Cyber Pro, Jim West, and I got a great guest for you today. He is John Baker, who is a director of MITRE's Center for Threat Informed Defense. For some of you, may call it by the acronym CTID, but it is the Center for Threat Informed Defense. And here he is, Mr. John Baker.
Hey, Jim, thanks for having me here. Really excited for the opportunity to talk with you more about cybersecurity, what it means to sort of grow up in cybersecurity, and what we do at the Center for Threat Informed Defense.
Wonderful. Well, I'm glad to have you on because, what a lot of folks don't know is that MITRE has just a plethora, or rather, the better word is a cornucopia of programs that do such tremendous good for not just cybersecurity, but multiple industries around the world. And this is just another very, very, very important program. And but before we get into the Center
Yeah.
of Threat Informed Defense, can we talk a little bit about MITRE? Because a lot of folks are probably hearing the word MITRE for the first time, like, who is MITRE? What is MITRE? What is MITRE and what is their mission?
Yeah. As we get into that, I think I'll start with just a little bit more on my background. So I've been at MITRE for about 21 years, which is crazy. That's never something that you plan out on day one, right?
Yeah.
Over time, it sort of evolves and happens a little bit, I guess. But I was a psychology major in my undergrad. I went to Tufts University, and by the time I graduated, I was starting to think about computer science, and ended up actually starting at MITRE as a software engineer.
Nice.
When I think about that 21 years in MITRE, what I realize is there's been kind of a common theme. I have been really fortunate. I was hired into a team that was doing research around CVE, one of the things that MITRE is most famous for. And in that role, I was basically a software engineer writing code for a network-based vulnerability scanner that was looking for CVEs on hosts, right? So I was very fortunate because I kind of got brought into that team. And then what happened is, well, that project ended as projects do, right?
Mhm.
But I was able to kind of pivot and start to work on some of the standards work that MITRE has done around CVE or with the CVE team. And so I've always had this kind of common theme of working with government and industry to advance cybersecurity for the whole community. And so kind of going to your question, putting that in the context of MITRE, right? So MITRE is a large nonprofit that runs federally funded research and development centers. We work in close partnership with U.S. government sponsors from the DoD to IRS to DHS across 7 different FFRDCs. And our role really is about being this like trusted advisor. We have long time, like enduring relationships where we work on some of the biggest problems that the US government and the nation faces, right? Cybersecurity being one of them. So it's really that experience and that opportunity to have huge impact and influence working with government industry to try to improve things for the whole community that's kept me motivated at MITRE, and why, like, I still believe MITRE is an amazing place to work, and there's amazing opportunities to have national but really global influence to make things better for the whole world, right? And so it's that mission at MITRE that's kept me motivated and going here. And it was really in that role that I ended up kind of identifying an opportunity to try to do something to really scale our collaboration with industry, right? But
Well,
MITRE really is a unique place.
obviously, MITRE is a wonderful organization to work with and for because you've committed, 20 plus years of your career, which is a sizable chunk of a lifetime, really, to this great organization. And so, I know there's so much research that gets done by MITRE, and but you mentioned a key acronym there, which some folks, obviously, some of our audience is looking into cyber to pursue careers in the cyber, and they may be brand new to the acronym CVE. So could you maybe explain what that is and why it's important and how it feeds into the Center for Threat Informed Defense?
Yeah, where to start? So, CVE, there's a couple things about that story that I think are worth noting. CVE is an acronym. It stands for Common Vulnerabilities and Exposures. We're celebrating CVE's 25th anniversary this year, right? We just hit that milestone a few weeks ago. That alone is amazing, for a cybersecurity focused program to have continued on that same program. Obviously, it's evolved and grown over time, is amazing. And, the way I would summarize it is CVE fundamentally is the way the world talks about vulnerabilities. Every security team everywhere in the world that is worried about a vulnerability is ultimately thinking about a CVE. So CVE is essentially the standard name for a vulnerability. And I think what's interesting and worth kind of highlighting for our conversation today is that, CVE, like a lot of the other work that we've done that is like globally known and impactful, it wasn't something that we set out to like solve the vulnerability naming problem. We actually were working to identify a product to use within our security program at MITRE and having a really hard time understanding the differences in those products and understanding the set of vulnerabilities that those products, claimed they could identify in our environment. And that led some, creative people to step back and think about this. And they ended up coming up with a way of kind of categorizing these vulnerabilities and trying to understand and really compare across products which vulnerabilities they could detect on systems, right? And the thing that's critical there is like this was a smart person trying to solve a practical problem in our internal security operations. But we have this environment that also incentivizes us to like step back and think a little bit more broadly. Well, how can we take that and help the whole world, right? Others probably have this same problem. And as we talk, you'll see that's a kind of a common theme that I've experienced here at MITRE is, I'm working on a problem. I have an idea how to solve it. Who else might be doing this? Who else might be working on this problem? Maybe I can share this and benefit from their perspective. Maybe I can share this and create a broader solution, right? And so it was really that kind of culture that I think enabled CVE with some really smart people. I was also very fortunate. I said I kind of started at MITRE on a team really adjacent to the CVE program. And so that meant I got to spend a lot of time with Dave Mann and Steve Christie, who are really the inventors of CVE. It was Steve Christie that was doing that tool bake-off, right? And so I got to learn a lot from them and with them over the years here. But, for me, that was kind of like the first step in the journey at MITRE. I eventually ended up working on this whole suite of like industry standards that were developed and funded by government aimed to become like open public standards. I worked on a project called OVAL, which was the Open Vulnerability and Assessment language. I was a co-creator of that language. And that fundamentally was, all right, we now have this large collection of vulnerabilities in CVE. How do I check an endpoint for presence of that vulnerability? So it's like an endpoint checking language, right? Mm-hmm. And, that too is one of those things where lots of products had proprietary knowledge of how to check for these vulnerabilities. And what we wanted to do was, help products get really good at checking for vulnerabilities and allow them to not compete on, the number of vulnerabilities they could check for, but instead their efficiency and effectiveness in checking for those vulnerabilities on an endpoint. So the idea was let's separate out and create this common language that we could all use. OVAL it's still used today by a whole bunch of different programs out there, and it's amazing to me to see just the impact that project has had. That led to like this whole suite of standards around understanding endpoint configuration, checking for endpoint configuration. So as I kind of grew at MITRE, I was able to eventually lead the team, lead some of our work programs for our FSRDC sponsors at DHS and at NSA that were funding those projects. and ultimately ended up running this department that was all about security automation, partnerships, standards work in cybersecurity. And so in that role, all the work with CVE and, Oval and all those things were kind of part of my organization. And again, just continuing to grow and learn tremendously with, bright minds like, Steve and Dave Mann, as I mentioned, right? Um, that kind of progressed a little bit. And I got to work with somebody who was, for me, uh, I guess inspiring, but sort of a mentor, and somebody who I think like we kind of worked off of each other really well. We were good compliments to each other. He always
Okay.
challenged me. So I was thinking of Rich Struess. He was my sponsor at the NKIC when it was called the NKIC at DHS, maybe like 8 or 10 years ago now. And Rich and I ended up creating the Styx and Taxi languages, which are now open standards at Oasis for describing threat intel and sharing it. So Styx is a data model for representing threat intelligence, and Taxi is the transport mechanism for exchanging that Styx data. Um, that experience there, that working very closely with industry, with formal standards body, taking this early concept, teaching people about it, training people, vendors, evolving it, leading the team, evolving it, working with DHS across multiple government organizations, leading it out to become a formal standards, for me was a huge step to what eventually became the Center for Threat Informed Defense. So I know that was kind of a long journey to get to the
Well,
Center for Threat Informed Defense
I, for one, will
today.
say thank you for going through
Yeah.
that long journey in your career because this is just, again, folks that are not familiar with the what the Center of Threat Informed Defense does. I know you're going to get into it and maybe show us hopefully some visuals and insights into it, but it is tremendous. And for one, just kind of bringing all the industry together to kind of, as they say, read off the same sheet of music, to talk the same jargon because it's too easy for people to get up in their silos with being proprietary this, proprietary that, and having their own, way to approach it. It can get messy real quick. But when you're able to set the stage for everyone to talk in this common language, that is tremendous. When, as they say, it's like herding cats. Having that common language to work off of, that's tremendous, and bringing everybody to the table. Kudos to you and your team for being able to make these tremendous accomplishments, just getting the language right. So, but I'm sorry to interrupt you, but yeah, I just want to
Oh
kind of
no,
highlight that
yeah.
that is a tremendous
I
effort.
I was thinking what I would do next, Jim, is I'm going to share a browser real quick
Okay.
and kind of walk through a couple of different things. I do want to explain a little bit more about what the Center for Threat Informed Defense really is, kind of share a bit of our origin story. So I thought I'd start by opening up a browser, get things set here. And then I thought I would talk through a couple of specific examples about the sorts of things that we can do at the Center for
Okay.
Threat Informed Defense. So one thing I just would want to emphasize is uh, following that basic model of MITRE, where we are an independent nonprofit trying to solve problems for a safer world at MITRE. When I created the center, I wanted to build essentially a privately funded research and development organization with that same mission, solving problems for a safer world, um, working to improve cyber defense for the whole community. You can see, the idea here of changing the game on the adversary. What I saw in that experience across standards bodies, working with industry, um, working with different threat intel sharing programs, was there was a tremendous opportunity to create an environment that allowed sophisticated security teams to collaborate on identifying and solving problems in a way that addresses their immediate need but benefits the whole community. And so there was this sort of goal, if you will, Jim, to try to take some of that lessons learned and experience from like the philosophy of threat intel sharing and ISACs and ISOWs, where, it's all about understanding, sort of like these ideas of like collective defense. We can work together. We can share threat intelligence to better understand what's happening, what's going to happen.
Mhm.
Those sorts of things were happening and having an impact, but it felt like there was a big gap there. We could do the research together too. And so we built out an environment for doing collaborative R&D where we publish everything that we do and make it open and freely available. And so today at the Center for Threat Informed Defense, we have about 40 member organizations that are deliberately global, cross-sector, non-government, that we bring together to systematically identify a problem and solve it in a way that benefits that organization, but benefits the whole community as we go, right? And the whole idea was to go from, instead of like a bespoke conversation with one or two organizations, to how do we create an environment where it's a safe space to talk about problems, talk about internal initiatives, learn from each other, and make plans to solve those together, right? So ultimately, we're now 5 years in with the Center for Threat Informed Defense. We've grown to 40 members. We've published 39 different research projects that
Oh,
are all open
nice.
and available. And it's all about making cyber defense more efficient and effective for the whole community, right?
John, not
Um,
to interrupt. I'm sorry to interrupt, but there is a name on here on your research partners. So I had the pleasure of having Keith Wilson in season two. Did a conversation with him about Attack IQ and the MITRE attack framework and how they're partnered with you guys. Again, they're a wonderful organization that provides their academy. Just to kind of shout that out for folks there. Attack IQ offers free training about the MITRE attack framework. It's all free, and you get friendly badges. And again, it's free and it's great training. So I just kind of wanted to shout that out since I see them on your, as part of your research partners list there. So sorry to interrupt, John. Continue,
oh
please.
no, Attack IQ, as you can see, was one of our founders.
Hmm.
Um, when we got started, we had this whole idea that we could, put aside competitive interests and solve a set of problems in a way that benefited everybody. And there was a bit
Yeah.
of a leap of faith that our founders took with us, right? So I am forever grateful to Attack IQ and our other founders for taking that leap of faith and enabling us to launch this organization. Um, yeah, the Attack IQ Academy, I think, is in my mind um, sort of a success metric for our research program. For every project that Attack IQ works with us on, um, you can go and find an academy course where they've gone basically beyond what we would do in our research program and put together training to help us make that research much more impactful. We want to create solutions that are widely used so that they have a global impact. Having training is critical for
Yes.
that, right? Um, yeah, so I thought what I would do is kind of go through an example of, how we run into a problem and we try to solve it and kind of tour a couple of research projects, if that makes
Great.
sense
Sounds
to
great.
you. So I think I've said MITRE ATT&CK a couple of times. When we got started with the Center for Threat Informed Defense, the real catalyst for me was we had a set of organizations that loved what we were doing with MITRE ATT&CK, that wanted to help. They were very much invested in using it and committed to helping to grow it and see it thrive. And they wanted to help with technical contributions. They realized we probably needed funding to do more. And then what was interesting was this one organization in particular was doing a project that was trying to map MITRE ATT&CK to the security controls in NIST 853. And they asked me if anybody else was doing it, could we connect them? Because it's a lot of work. And could we help them collaborate or could we work with them on it? Right. And we didn't really have a way to do that because we just had this focus on working with government only at the time. And it was interesting because they came to it from this perspective of, well, there's nothing special to us about that mapping. It's probably something lots of people are doing. We should just share that. we should collaborate on doing it better. And it was that kind of spirit and energy that I wanted to capture when we created the Center for Threat Informed Defense. So how could I get them and several others together to do that over and over again, right? So when you look at MITRE ATT&CK today, and attack is a knowledge base of observed adversary behaviors. And you can think of it as, MITRE effectively is playing like the curator of this resource. We are looking at threat intel that's publicly available. We're looking at threat intel contributions from the community, consistently reviewing them, vetting them, analyzing them, and integrating them into this knowledge base. And so now, you as a cyber defender can go to one place and have a relatively comprehensive knowledge base of what specific behaviors adversaries have been seen doing. It's used by most security organizations around the world, by most security vendors around the world. So it has this tremendous impact, right? And if you take a look at MITRE ATT&CK, so I thought I would just highlight a challenge. It's an incredibly valuable resource. Across the enterprise matrix, there's 656 techniques and sub-techniques. That is entirely overwhelming for everybody.
Yeah.
There's no expectation that any individual would know all of these things, right? But we've published this matrix that teams use, as I said, around the world to understand what adversaries are doing, to understand their ability to defend against those threats, right? So if you take a look at this scheduled task job technique here under the enterprise matrix, it falls under the persistence tactic, the execution, and the privilege escalation tactic. So tactic is basically the goal. Technique is how the adversary achieves that goal. There's a lot of information here. There's examples of how specifically this has been used in the wild by adversaries. There's information about mitigations. There's information about how to detect this. And this is an incredibly valuable resource. But again, it's incredibly overwhelming. And so if you're new to MITRE ATT&CK, where do you start, right? And that question there was the question that drove one of our early research projects. Basically, attack is incredibly overwhelming. Where should I start? At the time, we saw lots of publications that were, vendor proprietary lists of top techniques, right? Mm-hmm. So what are the most prevalent things that adversaries are doing? And we had, different perspectives on how you might arrive at a top attack technique list, right? But what we wanted to do was make it easy for anybody, any organization, any user, regardless of your level of sophistication, to quickly come away with, ignoring everything else. You're looking at MITRE ATT&CK, where should you start, right? So going back to my comment about sort of that culture and the philosophy within at MITRE, within our membership environment, with our center members, we tried to figure out how do we solve that, but do it in a way that will help everybody, but will also enable innovation. So what we did was, we came up with a detailed methodology. And if you look closely here, you'll see there's a bunch of math that kind of goes into, how we do this. And, for 90% of the users out there, this is way more than they ever want. They don't need to know about this.
But I love the transparency.
We want to be transparent. And, I said we want to innovate. We want to enable innovation, right? So if you want to build product capability around this, you need to know those details. So the methodology is open, all the code is open, our data set is open, and it's all available on GitHub, right? So we want that there to enable innovation. But then it's also incredibly important that we just make this accessible to any end user out there that wants to understand what technique should I be looking at next. So the top attack technique calculator will allow you I'm going to accept all the defaults, but will allow you just to come in and generate a top technique list. And so what this is telling us is, based on our data set and the factors that went into our methodology where we look at technique prevalence, we came up with this idea of co-occurrence, like these two things are likely to be seen together, sorry, choke points. So, if you are able to mitigate this particular technique, then that will effectively mitigate a whole slew of other techniques. Like think of it as like a gateway to other techniques,
Hmm.
right? Um, and then the other thing we wanted to do is if you're going to make a prioritized list, it should be actionable. So we try to prioritize list techniques that you could actually do something about. So some techniques are very hard for a defender to actually take action on or to mitigate. It might be important to understand and know those, but if you're thinking about how do I apply my resources to improve my defenses, we want frequency, we want to understand those choke points, and we want it to be actionable. And so that's what's going on in that methodology that's leading to this list. So a couple things. CTID.io, top-attack-techniques. It's open, freely available. Anybody can go there, use the tool just directly. There are threat hunt teams that use it as part of their threat hunting practice. There's vendors, I think you mentioned Attack IQ, they use it in their product. There's several vendors that do that. That's great. We love that. When vendors do that, that's scaling the impact of our research program. We want end users, industry to take it, innovate, build capability to really scale what we do. So I thought, as I said, I'd kind of tell this story. So we ended up with this question of, where do I get started? It's overwhelming. That led to
Hmm.
top attack techniques. I'm going to close that one. So now, if I'm looking at that scheduled task technique, is let's say we've detected some activity in our environment and, we had a detection that said, looks like a task was just scheduled on some system. So if I go to the technique inference engine, I'm going to hit schedule task job. I think that's the technique we were looking at.
Okay.
It's quick, responsive. And so what it's saying is, I saw this, I got an alert that this happened in my environment. So it's an observed technique. What we did was we built a machine learning model that we trained on threat intelligence reports to allow us to understand, all right, well, if I see this, what else might I see? So again, thinking about that, 656 techniques, I think it was,
Hmm.
corpus in the knowledge base, we need to help people figure out how to navigate that. How are adversaries putting those techniques together to achieve goals? So threat intel reports, if you think about it, when they talk about what an adversary did, they are describing sequences of steps. And, effectively, most intel reports these days reference attack techniques. So they kind of report, or they kind of represent a collection of techniques. So we had a little over 6,000 Intel reports that we processed as like collections of techniques. So when you start to do that with a large enough corpus, you can start to see patterns. So when I see scheduled task job, I'm probably also going to see some of these other techniques happen. The one I thought I would pick here is malicious file. So imagine hypothetically, we saw a scheduled task get created and we saw a file get transferred. We looked at it and, can tell that that's a malicious file. So now, probably what's happening is we're like scheduling a task to run that file to establish persistence or something, right? Um, well, that probably means maybe you're thinking of a spear phishing event might have happened that, had an attachment. And so you can see very responsive, starting to build out, kind of help you as an analyst not have to know every technique, benefit from all the reporting that's out there, but do it in an automated way to guide you, right?
I love it.
And Jim, the thing is that with the technique inference engine, just like with top attack technique calculator, it's a tool that you can just go use. The code for it's open source. The data set's open source. The machine learning model's available. We've published a Jupyter notebook so that, if you want to directly interact with it, retrain it, you can do that, right? What we want is, any user to have this resource. We also want to enable innovation. We want industry to take it, use it in product capabilities, that sort of thing. And I know there's threat intel teams that are now using it to inform their threat intel practice so they can create hopefully more comprehensive intel reports. Imagine like back in the days, Clippy, saying, "Hey, I see you're talking about T1053. You might also want to look around and see if you have evidence of T, 1204-002, right?" And so now you can start to have that capability based off of what adversaries have done in the past, right?
Nice.
Um, so I'm super excited for this project and some of the work that's going to then build up around it. This one we released this summer.
Wow. So this is brand new.
Yeah, this one's relatively new, and we're still getting a lot of feedback on it. And one thing when you run a research program, oftentimes successful research means we've identified more opportunities for research. And so there's a
Of
lot
course.
more that we're learning and
Work begets work.
we'll come on this. Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I love that it's brand new from this past summer, so it's still got that new car scent going
Absolutely.
for it. But anyone that's watching to this point, going, okay, I see this tab, you went to that tab. I just want to kind of put there the real quick word in that, hey, all of these links will be in the description below, so don't worry about having to
Yep.
squint your eyes and try to maximize your screen. John's going to provide all the links for me, and I'll have them in the description below, so you're just a click away. So sorry
Yeah,
about
and,
that,
and
John.
I would add on to that, Jim. There, I hope that you've heard from me. There's this recurring theme, like, please go check it out. Tell us about your successes. Tell us about, where it could be improved. We want to make these things better. Uh, Again, for this work to be impactful and to support that mission of improving cyber defense at scale, we need people to use it. We need that feedback to improve it, right?
Yes.
I thought I would mention just kind of two other resources that are out there.
Okay.
Um, so I mentioned that project that got us started, 800 mapping NIST 853 to MITRE ATT&CK. Well, probably not surprisingly, with the sort of global use of MITRE ATT&CK, one of the most common use cases is using it to then understand your ability to defend against a set of threats you care about, a set of specific behaviors, right? So eventually that leads to, well, I need to understand what security capabilities mitigate what techniques.
Hmm.
So Mappings Explorer brings together a whole set of work that we've done to understand native product security capabilities or capabilities in NIST 853 and map them to attack. So we've created very constant theme here, a web interface that allows you like easy search interaction with this corpus of mapped security capabilities. So you can see we've mapped AWS, Azure, Google Cloud Platform, NIST 853, M365, Barris, all of these, security capabilities, controls, vocabularies, we've mapped them to attack so that you have one place where you can go as a defender to understand, I'll pick on NIST 853 while this
While,
loads.
while you're pulling
Uh,
that up, some folks
oh
are
yeah.
like, what's this number, 853? And if you're
Oh
confused
yeah.
by that, it is a special publication by NIST that defines security controls that fall under the concept of the risk management framework. So a lot of folks have heard of RMF from NIST. And so, and again, a wonderful organization that put out a framework, and just like with anything, a company can leverage that framework to prove its security within their security program and their plans and policies. But remember, with anything that's a framework, you have to customize it to your business, your organization. But that 853 is a list of the security controls and everything, all the details surrounding the implementation and how you can actually check against those controls because they have another document called 53A, which is the assessment. But yeah, that's what this is, and this is tremendous because we talked earlier about how sometimes you can look at these things and you kind of feel like you're in an ocean of information overload. 853 can feel that way sometimes. So for the MITRE team to be able to make the correlation to the MITRE ATT&CK framework and how something that you want to do in your security program for your organization can also be linked to mitigating certain techniques and tactics, this is huge. So for anyone watching this point, John just said in one sentence, he said, we did all this work. It is a tremendous amount of work to get it right because,
Oh yeah.
again, having the knowledge of those security controls, you have to be an expert in both, really. And so, kudos to the team that worked on this, John. John, I got to say, this is
It's
tremendous work.
yeah, and Jim, it's just to emphasize it and there's a spreadsheet version. In that spreadsheet version, it's nearly 7,000 rows of security control linked to technique, right? And one of the things that I think has been really interesting about our research program is, it is hard work. It requires domain expertise that kind of bridges a couple of different roles to be able to do that. You need to know attack, you need to know the different control frameworks. Um, but it is work that lots of teams could do on their own. What we did was we did that work once. We published an open methodology to create transparency for people that want to understand, well, how did you make that decision? That's all there and available to you. But because we did that once, literally thousands of organizations around the world are saving a tremendous amount of time and effort
Yes.
not having to do this. They can just use it and they can focus on their security program. As you said, you have to tailor these controls to your organization, focus on those things. We have this common resource that everybody can use, and we maintain it as these resources evolve, right? And so sometimes when I think about our research program, it's part helping advance just the state of the practice, creating resources that make us all more efficient and effective, right?
Yes.
Sometimes it's about innovating, like the technique inference engine. How can we use machine learning to guide us in thinking about what other techniques to consider when we see some malicious behavior, right? And so we're always in that balance of advancing this practice, advancing the state of the art in threat-informed defense, right? So yeah, I was
Wonderful.
just going to say it's up here, it's available. You can now use this to understand for a set of security controls, what techniques does it mitigate? So if I went into like this account management control, you'll see there's a long list of techniques, 204 of them, that this control, again, it depends on how you've implemented it in your environment, may mitigate, right? And so all of the language I just used there was very deliberate, and it's explained kind of in that methodology. And you have to have the control implemented in your environment and that sort of thing. But we've done that hard work to link the framework to the threats. So then the other way around, if you're worried about credential dumping, the technique in MITRE ATT&CK that adversaries use, you can now go there and see, well, what security controls are available to me that might help me mitigate this. And so now you have this guide that looks at it from a control or looks at it from an adversary behavior. We have a lot of our resources end up kind of bridging communities or roles within a security program. So Jim, you talked about the risk management framework NIST developed, and our goal with this was also to kind of help connect those risk management practitioners with the threat intel teams and the operational security teams using that common language of MITRE ATT&CK.
Wow. Well,
Um,
this is really tremendous, John, because, with a lot of folks that work in risk management, it gives them another perspective into when they are scoring, like when there's a security controls assessment or an audit done for purposes of, like, let's say an ATO authorization to operate. If they have any deficiencies as are in their POAM, plan action and milestones, what they'll find is that they can also look at those weaknesses and see, well, what are we potentially opening ourselves up to? So they can have those discussions and already have a head start on that analysis, if you will, because you guys did the heavy lifting. So I love
yeah,
that tool exists and is available. Again, thank you, MITRE.
well, Jim, you just hit on something that was a really nice sort of discovery after the fact. So we released the technique inference engine, and on our radar were use cases around like supporting threat intel analysis, supporting threat hunting teams, helping teams make more robust detections, right? Well, some risk management practitioners saw it and were like, this is incredibly useful as I think about planning out threat scenarios. I now have a way to kind of tap into this large corpus of threat intel reports that you use to train that model on and build out higher fidelity models for the threat that I'm concerned with, right? And I thought I would mention that just because what we see is you get this diversity of perspectives in to drive what we do and how we do it. You get that broad user base using the work, innovating with it, and those are all successes and things that we really want to enable. I thought a quick anecdote for you. I showed the top attack technique calculator, and when we run a project, we work with our members to kind of to scope out, what's the problem we're going to solve, what's the approach going to be, what do the deliverables look like, and so we're in a meeting with a bunch of our members, and I thought I would show you as an example. I showed the technique inference engine. Um, you know, we worked with that. Oops, we worked with that set of organizations to develop the technique inference engine, right? And so we benefited from their technical contributions, their experience, in some cases, data sets, and kind of user feedback to drive that innovation, right? And they all learned from each other through that work too.
Yeah. And
So
these
when
are
we
all
were,
leaders
yeah,
at the forefront of industry, just so,
yeah,
like, you mentioned Google, IBM security, and my God, they're advancing us in quantum computing and other efforts as well. So again,
yeah.
these are heavyweights and titans of industry.
Well, I think too, what's interesting, Jim, is you know, HCA Healthcare, they're not in it for product development, right? They're the largest operator of hospitals in America. They have an awesome security team, and they see the value in working with others across sectors, opening up the sort of the curtain and talking about challenges they have and working together to solve them. Similar, you see like Lloyd's Bank and Citi, again, very sophisticated teams, and they understand the value of that collaboration across sectors with industry, trying to solve a problem in a way that benefits everybody.
Of course,
So I
because
thought,
this
okay,
concept we're stronger together. We have the
absolutely.
financial sector represented, healthcare, commercial businesses as well. Bringing everybody together. I love seeing that. Everybody is participating, and it does take a degree of. Let me just use the word of being as a company, not as a data vulnerability, but being a little vulnerable to open up or being the
Oh,
openness factor to share
absolutely.
information. Not a lot of companies want to share their dirty laundry or the skeletons in their
Yeah.
security programs. But for these companies to come together and say, hey, we're all trying to achieve the same goal of making each other stronger and our defenses stronger. So I love it. I love it.
Yeah, one of the things that we realized was where a lot of like threat intel sharing programs kind of break down or barriers there is, there's a lot of reluctance to share information about a specific incident that's happened to you. What we have seen though is um, it's a little bit easier for an organization to say, you know what, we're trying to figure out how to better prioritize attack techniques. That doesn't mean they've been exposed to a threat. And it does seem like it's a little bit easier to talk about some of the internal initiatives and challenges as
Yeah.
opposed to, we've gotten this compromise and, like that sort of intel
Mhm.
sharing. It's a different thing. But to your point though, Jim, it also is a set of organizations that um, are trying to have sort of a public good as one of the outcomes of their security program, kind of recognizing that, you know, no organization is really an island, that it's an environment where we need to collaborate to really become
Yes.
more efficient and effective. Just to finish a thought on that top attack technique anecdote, we were going to publish a list, we were going to publish a methodology. And one of our members said, well, that's great, but you got to make this more accessible to everybody. You need to build a calculator. And that actually, like, it clicked with us. And we're like, oh, wait a second. We need to kind of pivot all together and turn this into a project that's really about kind of codifying that methodology that would have been a nice read for someone that's super technical but not actionable, right? And turn it into a tool that you can use, anybody can use, right? And it's that kind of perspective that, helps ensure that we're creating projects that become relevant and practical resources, right? Uh, I thought I would share with you. I mentioned some projects. I thought I would just mention, two things. Uh, all of our work is available on our website under the Our Work section. Lots of projects. I won't talk through all of them. I I did want to mention that also at the end of the summer, we released sort of the first big milestone in a new focus area that we've created. We're building out a whole focus area around secure AI. taking that set of lessons learned and experiences that we've seen in, traditional enterprise security built around MITRE ATT&CK and trying to take a threat-informed defense approach to understanding threats to AI-enabled systems and
Hmm.
helping the world understand how to mitigate those, how to test our systems for those threats, right? So this isn't about using AI to automate defenses. This is not about using AI to attack systems. This is about understanding those AI, the threats to AI-enabled systems and helping defenders protect those, right? So you'll see a lot more coming from us over the next few months
Nice.
to build out that focus area. Yeah, I'm super excited for it. It's interesting, Jim. It was uh, every project members kind of opt in to whether they want to participate in that project. So very flexible. You pick and choose where you put your time and effort and resources. Our first secure AI project had 16 member organizations. So nearly half of our membership made it very clear that that was a priority for them and committed resources, technical contributions to help us build that out. And it led to the largest update of MITRE Atlas to date. Atlas is an attack-like framework of known threats to AI-enabled systems.
Nice.
See, I think I'll kind of stop the Center for Threat Informed Defense tour there. As you can tell, I get super excited to talk about our
I
research.
love the passion
I
there.
love telling
The
stories about
dedication and
it.
passion is through the roof. I love it. That's a lot of information, folks. So again,
I know it is.
don't feel like you're overwhelmed. There's it's great information and all the links are below. So click each link, spend 10, 15, 20 minutes or the rest of your day just playing around with the calculators and just, getting more, informed about what these tools are and what it can do for you and others on your teams and colleagues. And even, and like you said, if you see something wrong, like why is it like this? Hey, there are no stupid questions. Message the team. They should be contact emails, I'm assuming, on all these sites to provide feedback.
Yeah, absolutely.
Wonderful. So, John, if you don't mind, I know we've shared a lot of information. I know we could talk for hours and hours, and your time is very valuable, and I want to be respectful of your time. So, if you don't mind, I'd like to kind of, this is my most favorite question that I ask folks. So, if we was to go in a time machine, and you mentioned you've been working, I think, 21, 22 years for MITRE, if we
21
could go
years.
back to day one when you decided that, hey, I think I want to do IT cyber work as my career, is there a story there that you could share with us? Because I know earlier
Uh,
you talked about your degree and then you kind
sure.
of pivoted into
Yeah.
another role, but what was the story that made that was like, okay, this is the decision moment?
Yeah. Probably like a lot of people, this wasn't a deliberate thing. Um, I had a friend in college that did an internship at MITRE. He then joined MITRE as an employee after he graduated. I was working at a couple of different startups, trying to become a software engineer. I was, as I said, a psych major. I was then taking courses to get a master's in software engineering and looking for ways to get my foot in the door as an engineer. And he was actually leaving MITRE to go and do something else, but he reached out to me. He's like, "Hey, John, you really ought to go and check out MITRE. It's a great place. I guarantee you're going to love it. You're going to become a MITRE lifer." It's like, no way. I saw it as another logical step, really, in kind of advancing towards being a mature software engineer. And so I had been a QA test engineer and then a software engineer at a small startup. And then this was like another opportunity to really focus on software engineering, where I was, developing that vulnerability scanner. And again, I vividly remember when this friend Ramsey was kind of joking with me that you're going to love it. You're going to be a MITRE lifer. You'll never leave. And I was like, oh, no way. Mentally, I was like, yeah, I'll probably be there for a couple of years. I'll learn and I'll go, figure out what the next thing is. Um, but as I said earlier, what happened was, I was in a great environment with great people. Um, I was curious, and I always had like the opportunity to kind of pursue the next thing. There was always another challenge, right? And MITRE is a great environment for that. You can really grow, as I did. You can kind of grow up at MITRE and
Well,
learn and do many different things.
Well, I'm so
Um,
glad that he made that recommendation to you, and the industry as well as the world is better off for that, and you doing what you've done and continue to do. Because I still, there's so much more great things in your career ahead of you. So I'm just excited to all the evolutions of, the MITRE ATT&CK framework as well as the CTID and other programs I know is probably in your future. Um, Here's a section, and I know we're wrapping up on time, but I like to do a kind of quick fire round of questions. There's no right or wrong answer. It's just for some levity. We've been talking a lot of heavy tech stuff, security controls. So if you're ready, we'll begin.
yeah,
All
shoot.
right, first one off the bat. This is a divisive one. So Star Wars or
Uh-oh.
Star Trek?
Oh, Star Wars for
Star
sure.
Wars. All right, my man.
Yeah.
Cake or pie?
Ooh, cake. Yeah, I
What
think
what
cake
kind
at
of
the moment.
cake?
Oh, we got a birthday coming up this weekend, so I'm gonna go with ice cream cake.
Okay,
That's usually the norm for
ice cream
us.
cake is always good. Is a
Yep,
hot dog a sandwich?
not at all.
All right, here's a good one. What is your most favorite book of all time, and what's the last book you've read?
Ooh, favorite of all time. How about I'll like redirect a favorite sort of business oriented book that I like and I sort of aspire to use really is The Five Dysfunctions of a Team by Patrick Lencioni. What I like about it is it very clearly kind of breaks down sort of the dysfunctions you see in teams that play out over and over again, the symptoms so you can diagnose it, and strategies for flipping that and turning that around, right?
Love that.
And you got to like we're all more impactful, more effective if we can build great teams that are working towards a common purpose, that
Yes.
trust each other, that are committed to that goal, that are benefiting and learning from each other. So I think as I've grown as a leader, that's been a really valuable book for me, for sure.
Nice.
I'll share a different book, and this is a little bit more personal. One of my daughters is a swimmer, and she as she was growing up, I read aloud this book called Swimming to Antarctica. It's an awesome book about this woman that as she kind of grows through youth swimming and competitive swimming, she finds a passion for essentially endurance events, and
Wow.
she does all of these like big crazy swims, crossings, English Channel, all this sort of stuff, and eventually does swim to Antarctica where the water is like just below freezing. No wetsuit or anything like that. It's a
Wow.
pretty cool book, and what I love is that it actually really clicked with my daughter too, and it's inspiring for her. She's read it a few times since. So yeah,
Well, I was a single parent of two girls for 17 years, and my youngest had a passion for music for a short time. So I love it when, as fathers, we want to support their dreams and support their
yeah,
activities. And I had taken her to Juilliard because her dream at one point in her school life was to attend Juilliard. And so I see that. And then the fact that you see that it matches their visions and
yeah,
dreams, it's something to see that, right?
yeah, it
What
is.
about the last book you read? Was that the last book you read?
No, that's been one that's been around for a little
Oh,
while.
okay.
I almost I kind of feel guilty acknowledging this because I really like some of the material that Simon Sinek has put out around
Oh,
Start With Why, but I
Simon is
only just
excellent.
read it recently, and so
Uh-huh.
that is the most recent book that I finished is Start With Why, and I think it's something that like, everybody should read. It is
Yes.
in all that we do, you are like always needing to pitch or help people understand why something that you do, why an idea is important, and like get buy-in. Kind of also is a complement to that Five
Yes.
Dysfunctions book, right?
Yes.
Um, but yeah, so Start With Why is a great one too.
Purpose is everything at the end of the day because
Yeah,
purpose also will create your legacy. So I love that.
yeah,
Simon Sinek is extraordinary. If anyone hasn't heard of Simon Sinek yet, go to YouTube, go to any of your social media platforms, just get
yeah,
any of his clips. It's all gold. It's diamonds that is
yeah.
offered to you from Simon. So one of the last things I like to talk about is ask you, is there any like, I know you got a tremendous day job. But when you're outside of the office, are there any kind of volunteer work that you do, charities you support, nonprofits and things outside of MITRE being a nonprofit? But are there other organizations that you're passionate about, you love their missions that you kind of want to shine a light on?
Yeah. I have to admit that I don't have one that jumps right to mind. And this is like a little bit of maybe a guilty confession. I have I have four daughters that keep us very busy.
Okay, yeah.
So outside of work, it's like, probably twice as busy with the kids, taking them to their sports and all of their activities and that sort of thing. I do have I aspire to do more, but
No
I
worries,
just
no worries. Again, it's a question I usually
yeah,
ask. It's just in case there's something going on.
yeah.
Well, my apologies about that.
Oh
Um,
yeah.
so John, if for going back to all the wonderful work that you and Miter do, is there any kind of closing statement to someone that's watching this right now that has stayed with us for this full hour and saw all the visuals you provided, all the websites and all that, and the links are down below. So for anyone watching, you can one click away from all this great information. But if you had a closing statement to make to people about you just mentioned Simon Sinek, what is the why of the Center for Threat Informed Defense? And why is that important to someone watching right now?
Yeah, I love it. I'd sum it up. I love that challenge too. I'd sum it up really clearly and quickly. Ultimately, we have an opportunity as a community to bring our combined knowledge together and improve cyber defense at a global scale. And we're trying to do that through our research program at the center.
Excellent. Well, John, thank you so much for your time today. Consider this my offering of an open invitation for you to come back to the podcast to shine a light on any future programs because you already mentioned the AI initiatives.
Yeah.
I'm so excited to hear about that. I know there's so many more great programs in your future because, again, you've been tremendous in the industry. Keep doing the great work that you and MITRE do. And please, folks, check out these links in the description. Learn more about MITRE. MITRE is a tremendous. They're a titan when it comes to cybersecurity and protecting our data and networks, and they continue to do so on a daily basis. They're a great organization with some great people, and John is just another level 99 expert when it comes to this stuff. So thank you again, John, so much.
Yeah. Thanks a lot, Jim. It's a pleasure to be here.